There's no grizzly bears in California. They killed them all. Do you know why they killed them all? Because they killed people.
These bears already rule the wild. They're nature's final boss. But apparently, that's not enough. Some scientists are considering bringing in another predator, one deadly enough to challenge or even kill them. It sounds insane, but the reason behind it might be even crazier. Grizzly bears. Just saying the name already gives most people chills. These are not the cuddly cartoon bears we grew up with. They're walking tanks wrapped in fur. A full-grown male can weigh over 800 pounds, stand 9 feet tall, and hit speeds of 30 miles per hour. Yeah, good luck outrunning one. But what really makes grizzlies terrifying isn't just their size, it's their attitude. They're short-tempered, territorial, and confident enough to pick fights with anything that moves. They don't hunt for sport, they fight for dominance. Their claws can grow longer than a man's fingers, and one swing could take off your head before you even realize what's happening. Add a bite force of 1,200 pounds per square inch, and you've got an animal that could literally crush a bowling ball if it felt like it. And the wild stories about them? They're not exaggerations. In Alaska, a grizzly was once hit by a car and just walked away. Another was reportedly hit by a train twice and survived. Even specially designed bear-proof dumpsters weighing almost 800 pounds don't stand a chance once a grizzly decides it wants what's inside. That's what makes them the undisputed apex predator of North America. They don't just rule their environment, they define it. Every other creature in the forest, from wolves to elk, shapes its behavior around avoiding the grizzly. You could say nature itself bends to their presence. And maybe that's the real problem, because when an animal has no natural enemies, it can start to reshape the ecosystem in ways we didn't expect. In places like Yellowstone, scientists have noticed how changes in the bear population ripple through everything, from deer numbers to fish stocks. Grizzlies eat almost anything. Berries, salmon, moose calves, even other bears. They're nature's cleanup crew, but also its most unpredictable wrecking ball. Yet, despite all this power, humans still find ways to mess things up. For decades, we hunted grizzlies almost to extinction. Then, when they bounced back, we suddenly realized we might have swung the balance too far in the other direction. More bears means more territory fights, more attacks, and more pressure on prey populations. So now, some scientists are asking a question no one thought we'd ever hear again. What if we introduced another predator? Something capable of challenging the grizzly, not to wipe them out, but to control them. The fact that anyone's even thinking about it says a lot about how desperate we've become to fix the mess we made. But here's the thing. When you're built like a walking tank, you eventually run out of enemies. For a grizzly, that's not a metaphor. There's barely anything left in North America that can take it down. Wolves? Too small. Cougars? Not even close. The only creature that can really challenge a grizzly is another grizzly. Out there in the wild, every mountain range tells the same story. One bear claiming dominance, the rest trying to stay out of its way. Grizzlies don't just fight for food. They fight for reputation. And sometimes, those fights turn into scenes you'd swear were out of an ancient gladiator movie. Take Banff National Park, for example. Locals call him the boss. Scientists know him as Bear 122. But everyone who's seen him knows that name doesn't do him justice. He's massive, over 600 pounds, scarred, and old enough to have outlived several generations of rivals. Rangers say when he wakes from hibernation, the forest goes quiet. And he's not just surviving, he's thriving by doing something few bears dare, hunting his own kind. In 2013, researchers found the remains of a smaller bear in his territory. Skull, paws, and nothing else. The signs were clear. The boss didn't just chase it off, he ate it. To him, another bear isn't family, it's competition. Even other big males know better than to test him. One rival, nicknamed Split Lip for obvious reasons, tried. The fight was brutal and short. When it was over, the boss was still standing, scarred but undefeated. Since then, he's ruled Banff's Bow River Valley like a one-bear empire. That's the level of aggression we're dealing with here. Grizzlies don't just fight to survive, they fight to control the narrative of their ecosystem. Every river, every hill, every scent mark is a message. This is mine. So, when people talk about introducing a new predator, something that could challenge that, it's not just a biological experiment. It's a challenge to the very top of nature's hierarchy. Because if one grizzly can destroy another just to keep its crown, imagine what happens when an outsider shows up. A predator just as strong, but colder, hungrier, and built for a different kind of war. And that's exactly what's already happening. Far to the north, where the ice never melts, and two apex predators are starting to cross paths for real. As grizzlies push north looking for food, they're stepping into enemy territory, the frozen empire of the polar bear. And when two apex predators that were never meant to share the same zip code finally meet, things get tense. See, grizzlies are expanding. Warmer seasons mean longer feeding windows, and more bears are following rivers north in search of salmon and carrion. Meanwhile, polar bears are being forced south, driven off the melting sea ice they've relied on for millennia. The result? Two heavyweight champions of evolution bumping into each other more often than ever before, and neither one likes company. Polar bears are no pushovers. They're the largest land carnivores on Earth, stretching over 10 feet long and weighing up to 1,500 pounds. Their size alone gives them a massive edge, but the grizzly's got something the polar bear doesn't: rage. Where the polar bear is a patient assassin built for stealth and endurance on ice, the grizzly is a brawler, territorial, reactive, and ready to throw down at the slightest challenge. When these two meet, it's like watching two worlds collide: the frozen hunter versus the mountain warrior. And the encounters are real, not theory. Scientists have documented them on Arctic coastlines in Alaska and Canada, usually around whale carcasses washed ashore. For polar bears, those carcasses are survival gold, loaded with blubber and fat. But when a grizzly shows up, the rules change fast. In one observation, a single grizzly approached a dozen polar bears feeding on a dead whale. The polar bears backed off. Not because of size, but because of attitude. Grizzlies don't bluff. They're willing to take hits, start fights, and risk injuries polar bears usually avoid. In freezing conditions, every ounce of energy matters. For the polar bear, a fight is a waste of calories. For the grizzly, it's just another Tuesday. That's what makes this so fascinating. Evolution built both species for dominance, but in opposite directions. The polar bear became a specialized hunter, surviving almost entirely on seals and relying on stealth, precision, and the vast quiet of the ice. The grizzly evolved to adapt to everything: fish, fruit, mammals, even trash dumps. That flexibility gives it the edge when food gets scarce. But here's the wild part: these showdowns aren't always ending in blood. Sometimes they end in hybrids. Yeah, real ones. They're called pizzly bears or growler bears, born when a polar bear mates with a grizzly. Scientists have confirmed at least a handful in the wild. They've got the size and endurance of a polar bear mixed with the aggression and adaptability of a grizzly. Basically, nature's remix of two top predators, and a sign that the line between their worlds is disappearing. And if that's not enough to worry scientists, it's what comes next that's raising eyebrows. Because these encounters, whether fights or hybrids, prove one thing: the grizzly's territory isn't just expanding, it's conquering. And with every step north, the balance of the Arctic is shifting. But this story doesn't stop at natural clashes. Some researchers are now taking it one step further, asking a question that sounds straight out of horror movie. What if humans deliberately introduced a predator strong enough to keep grizzlies in check? At first, it sounded like something ripped straight out of a late-night conspiracy thread. But it wasn't a joke. The idea actually surfaced in conservation circles. Not because people fear bears, but because nature's balance is starting to buckle under their power. Here's the irony. For most of history, humans were the grizzlies' biggest threat. We hunted them, trapped them, drove them off their land until only a few hundred were left across parts of the U.S. By the 1970s, the species was practically on life support. Then came federal protection, strict conservation laws, and decades of hands-off recovery. And it worked. Maybe too well. Now, in places like Yellowstone and Alaska, grizzlies are thriving again. Populations have doubled, their territories have stretched wider, and suddenly, the apex predator that once needed saving is calling the shots. Elk, moose, and deer populations are shrinking faster than expected. Salmon runs are being hit hard in certain rivers, and ranchers living along park borders are losing livestock. Not from drought, not from wolves, but from bears bold enough to wander into open pastures in broad daylight. So, a few researchers started asking the question no one wanted to say out loud. What if we introduced another predator? Something powerful enough to keep the grizzlies in check. A natural regulator instead of human hunters or relocation programs. The logic sounded clean on paper. After all, we've used predator balancing before. Wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone in the 1990s to keep deer and elk numbers stable, and it worked beautifully. Rivers reshaped, vegetation grew back, and ecosystems flourished. So why not take that concept one step higher up the food chain? That's where the conversation started getting, well, a little unhinged. Because when you start listing creatures capable of taking on a grizzly, the results sound less like a field guide and more like a monster manual. The first name on that list? The saltwater crocodile. Picture a prehistoric tank that's been perfecting the art of ambush for 200 million years. These reptiles can grow over 19 feet long, weigh 3,000 pounds, and bite with a force greater than 3,700 per square inch. Stronger than a T-Rex's estimated jaw strength. All it would take is one wrong step near the water's edge, and even a grizzly would be dragged under before it could blink. Sounds like overkill, because it is. Next came the hippopotamus, nature's grumpy war machine. People think they're cute until they learn these 10,000-pound beasts kill more humans in Africa each year than lions, crocs, and sharks combined. They're fast, 18 miles per hour on land, and aggressive enough to ram a boat clean in half. Against a grizzly, that's not a fight, that's a demolition. And then came the rhinoceros, a real-life battering ram with a horn that can grow over 5 feet long and punch through bone like cardboard. There's an old account from Africa where a rhino charged a pride of lions, gored one mid-leap, and sent it flying like a rag doll. Even lions, the kings of the savannah, avoid picking fights with rhinos. A grizzly wouldn't stand a better chance. So yeah, technically, there are predators capable of taking down a bear. But here's the part that stops the conversation cold. None of them belong here. Each one of those animals lives in a completely different environment, shaped by a completely different ecosystem. Dropping a hippo, croc, or rhino into North America would be like adding a grenade to a chess match. It wouldn't just challenge the grizzlies, it'd rewrite the entire food chain. And that's the part most people miss. When humans introduce a new top predator, they're not solving a problem, they're creating a new one. That's what happened in Australia with cane toads and in Florida's Everglades with invasive pythons. The predator does its job at first, and then keeps going. It hunts, breeds, and spreads until the balance collapses completely. Even the most optimistic biologists admit it. This plan is a gamble with stakes too high to call. The moment you add a new apex predator to nature's top floor, there's no undo button. It doesn't just fight bears, it hunts everything. competes with wolves, steals food from eagles, and starts a turf war with humans in the middle of it all. And the grizzlies? They wouldn't just vanish, they'd adapt, get meaner, get faster, start pushing back. That's not balance, that's escalation. So when you really think about it, this isn't just a question of biology, it's a test of human ego. Because if we're seriously considering introducing another killer just to control the one we can't handle, maybe it's not the bears that need management. Maybe it's us. For all their strength, grizzlies still learn the hard way that even kings get humbled. Because sometimes it's not predators they should fear, it's herbivores. The so-called peaceful animals that, when pushed, turn into freight trains of fury. Take bison, for example. You'd think they'd be easy targets, big, slow, grazing across the open plains. But to a grizzly, a bison isn't dinner. It's a death wish on 4 legs. These beasts can spin on a dime when threatened. And unlike most prey, they don't run. They charge. One of the most jaw-dropping moments ever caught in Yellowstone proves it. A lone grizzly wandered too close to a bison herd near Old Faithful. At first, it looked like a casual standoff, but then one young bull decided he'd had enough. In seconds, the whole herd turned and thundered straight toward the bear. Imagine that. Over 20 bison, each heavier than a car, stampeding across the snow. The grizzly didn't stick around to play hero. It bolted for the trees, tail between its legs. And that wasn't cowardice, it was instinct. Even a predator that eats moose and takes down elk knows when the odds are impossible. The same goes for moose, the largest members of the deer family. A bull moose can stand 6.5 feet tall at the shoulder, weigh 1,600 pounds, and hit with enough force to shatter ribs. Grizzlies occasionally hunt moose calves, but if they cross paths with an adult male in rut season, things can turn deadly fast. Moose don't just defend, they attack. There are reports of moose killing wolves, flipping cars, and even trampling bears that got too close. And while that sounds like the ultimate North American showdown, the grizzly's humbling doesn't stop there. Across the ocean, other herbivores have already proven they can stand toe-to-toe with apex predators and win. Like the hippopotamus. In Africa, crocs don't dare mess with them. Lions? They keep their distance. Hippos are built like submarines with anger issues. And what makes them truly terrifying is unpredictability. They'll charge boats, trucks, even the air itself if it looks at them wrong. In a straight-up fight, a grizzly might be faster on land, but in water, it's game over. The hippo's sheer mass, up to 5 tons, and that gaping 150-degree bite mean one chomp could end it instantly. And then there's the giraffe, nature's elegant sniper. They look gentle, but their legs tell a different story. A single kick from a giraffe's 12-inch hooves can shatter a lion's skull or crush its spine. In some cases, it's even decapitated predators mid-charge. Now imagine that same strike landing on a bear's head. Doesn't matter how thick the fur is, it's lights out. That's the irony of nature. The creatures that look the least dangerous often end up being the most ruthless defenders. No claws or fangs, just raw power and precision. And that's what keeps ecosystems in balance. Because predators may dominate, but they don't control. Nature makes sure of that. And whenever humans forget it, the system has a brutal way of reminding us. But what happens when humans force that balance to change? When they decide to rewrite the food chain itself? That's where this story starts to get truly dangerous. Every time humans step in to fix nature, it's like pressing random buttons on a machine we don't fully understand. Something's bound to break. And history's packed with those moments when good intentions turned ecosystems into chaos. You'd think we'd learn after the cane toad disaster in Australia. Back in the 1930s, farmers had a beetle problem chewing up their sugar cane. The solution? Import a bunch of toads from Hawaii to eat them. Only one tiny problem. The beetles lived high on the stalks, way out of reach. The toads couldn't climb, so instead they multiplied like crazy and started devouring everything else. Native species dropped. Predators that tried eating the toads died from their poison, and now, nearly a century later, Australia's still paying for that one idea. The same story played out in Guam. When brown tree snakes invaded after World War II, they wiped out 10 native bird species and threw the whole island's food web off balance. Scientists tried dropping poisoned mice by parachute, literally, to kill them. It helped, but only barely. The snakes adapted faster than the plan. And that's what scientists worry about with the grizzlies. If you drop a new apex predator into an already fragile ecosystem, it won't just fight bears. It'll start rewriting the rules. That's called a trophic cascade, where one change at the top ripples all the way down. The Yellowstone wolf reintroduction is the most famous example. Wolves brought back balance. Deer populations dropped, vegetation regrew, rivers stabilized. But that worked because wolves belonged there in the first place. Now imagine the same thing but with a species that doesn't belong. One that hunts everything in sight, multiplies fast, and doesn't fear humans. You'd get the opposite of balance. Let's say, hypothetically, we introduced a new predator tough enough to take on grizzlies. Something like a massive feline species, or even an apex reptile from another region. At first, sure, the grizzly population might shrink. But then what? That new predator still needs to eat. So it starts targeting moose, elk, even livestock. Then wolves compete with it. Then prey numbers collapse. Before long, you've got starvation on all levels, from herbivores to carnivores. And the cycle of destruction keeps spinning. And that's not even the biggest risk. The real danger is behavioral change. When predators share territory, they adapt. They become more aggressive, more territorial, and more unpredictable. That means higher odds of human encounters, and not the kind anyone survives. Scientists have models that predict these scenarios, and none of them end well. Once a predator establishes itself, you can't just undo it. You can't fence it in or pack it up. It breeds, spreads, and starts shaping the land to its own advantage. And humans? We're just collateral damage in the background. So yeah, introducing a new killer to fight another sounds clever on paper, but in nature, there's no off switch. Every action sets off a chain reaction that lasts generations. And if there's one thing we've proven time and time again, it's that we're not great at guessing which button we're pressing. Because the moment you try to outsmart nature, you stop being part of the balance and start being the problem. But as risky as that sounds, the next dilemma isn't about ecosystems or numbers anymore. It's about something much bigger. A moral question humanity keeps dodging. Do we even have the right to play God over the wild? Because if history's taught us anything, every time humans try to micromanage nature, the result looks more like guilt than genius. Scientists are split down the middle on this. On one side, you've got the control crowd, conservation biologists who argue that apex predators, no matter how majestic, sometimes need intervention. They see grizzlies not as villains, but as disruptors in a delicate system. Too many bears in one region, they say, can send prey populations crashing and cause ripple effects that threaten biodiversity. And if introducing another predator can restore balance, maybe it's worth at least considering. Then, on the other side, you've got the coexistence crowd, and they're not buying it. Their argument is simple. The imbalance isn't nature's fault. It's ours. We're the ones who pushed ecosystems to the brink, cut up habitats with highways, removed natural rivals, and then acted shocked when the top predator started taking over. Why punish the bear for surviving the world we broke? That tension, science versus ethics, isn't new. We've seen it before in debates over wolf culling, shark nets, and even elephant contraception. Each time, the same question echoes. Are we managing wildlife, or just managing our own fear of losing control? And honestly, maybe that's what this whole introduce another predator idea really is. A reflection of us. Humans hate unpredictability. We crave order, charts, and population graphs that make sense. But nature doesn't work like that. It's messy, brutal, and self-correcting, if we just let it. That's not to say conservation isn't important. It is. But there's a difference between protecting nature and policing it. For instance, in Yellowstone, when grizzlies were first reintroduced decades ago, there was panic. Locals feared livestock losses and attacks. Over time, the park adapted, adding bear-proof containers, creating safety zones, and even rerouting trails during mating season. No extra predators needed, just better coexistence strategies. And that's the real alternative. Instead of playing matchmaker between apex predators, conservationists are now investing in habitat zoning and migration corridors, basically giving animals the space they need to self-balance. Others are using non-lethal deterrents like electric fences, sound devices, and scent-based repellents to reduce human-bear conflict. It's slower, less flashy, but it works because it respects how the system was built to function in the first place. But the moral dilemma still lingers, because deep down, humans don't just want to coexist, we want control. We've spent centuries believing that if we can't dominate nature, we can at least design it. And that mindset might be the most dangerous predator of all. So, when scientists talk about introducing a new killer to balance grizzlies, it's not just an experiment, it's a mirror. It reflects how we see ourselves in nature's hierarchy, not as part of it, but as its architect. And that's where this story turns philosophical. Because if we're willing to unleash one predator to kill another, where does it end? What happens when we become the species that needs balancing? It's strange, isn't it? The same species that nearly erased grizzlies from the wild is now debating how to control their comeback. We've gone from hunters with rifles to scientists with models. But the story hasn't really changed. We're still trying to dominate something that was never ours to begin with. The truth is, grizzlies aren't villains. They're reminders, proof that nature doesn't forget. You can move highways, change laws, and build fences, but you can't outthink the wild. It always finds a way back. And maybe that's what scares us most. The grizzly isn't just a bear. It's a reflection of power we can't regulate. It doesn't care about conservation charts or ecological forecasts. It lives by one rule: survival. And if it means taking over, it will. That's not aggression. That's instinct. So when people talk about introducing another predator, they're not really talking about bears. They're talking about control. Our fear that nature's balance might not need us anymore. But here's the irony. Every time we try to fix the wild fixes us. It humbles us, reminds us that no matter how advanced we get, we're still guests in its house. Maybe the answer isn't to fight the grizzly, but to finally learn from it. Because if there's one creature that embodies resilience, power, and adaptation, it's the one we keep trying to tame. And in the end, that's the real twist of this whole story. The grizzly was never the problem. We were. We've spent centuries deciding what lives, what dies, and what balance should look like. But the truth, nature doesn't need a manager. It just needs time and space to remember how to heal itself. Because in the wild, there's no villain and no hero, only survival. And that's something no predator, not even us, can rewrite. If that left you thinking, hit like, share it with someone curious, comment below, what would you do if you were in charge of nature's balance? And subscribe for more deep dives into the world nature's still rewriting.